our country to their goods, but they put up massive barriers, and that's not free trade, that's stupid trade.
Do you think that his policies are kind of why you have a job today?
I know it is. Wish I could mate him.
What would you say?
Thank you. Love you, man.
Trump tells me, personally, he's a free trader. I believe him. No, does it scare me?
Yes? He scares me.
Oh, he scares me all the time.
Hello everyone, we hope you are well, and this video will give you clear idea about US and China trade war. Now let's begin with Shapla and continue with Fojila, Alpona and Tania. We hope you will enjoy the video.
In my part, I will cover why the US versus China trade war happens, what was the policy behind it, also a bit about the effect of it, one mainly the beginning action or retaliated action on it, about the pre-pandemic perspective. With the starting, I want to ask a question. What is trade war? Well, we know that trade war is a situation in which countries try to damage each other's trade, typically by the imposition of tariffs or quota restriction. Now the question can come, what is tariff? Well, tariff is mainly a tax or duty to be paid on a particular class of export or import. Mainly, a trade war happens when one country retaliates against another by raising import tariffs or placing other restrictions on the other country's imports. Critics of trade war claim that they ultimately hurt local companies, consumers, and the economy. Same thing happened between China versus US trade war. China is the #1 trading partner of the United States with a grand total of roughly $737 billion in goods and services traded among one another for 2080, according to the Office of the United States Trade Representative. Wow, that was great. But if China exported almost $558 billion of those, it was not great. If you are the US and only exported $179 billion. As we can see, there is a huge trade imbalance here with the US importing more from China than it exports to China. Now, with this point of view, Donald Trump said that we opened our country to their goods, but they put up massive barriers, and that's not free trade, that's stupid trade. So, by his rhetoric, he slapped tariff on imported steel and alumina from China. Trump sending shockwaves through Washington and around the world. In political arena, the issue of trade, this alumina plant shut its door in 2016 and 800 employees lost their job. After that, 2 years later, they rehired this employee again. So, for the steel and alumina workers, the tariffs are undoubtedly working. But while Trump's policy might save the job, critics contended that they will kill jobs and other sectors because it increases the huge tax on American citizens and started trade war that hit the wallets of American consumer. Because the cost of flat screen TV, medical devices and other things going up, the administration fired back at its critics. The demonstration downstream effect of steel and alumina tariff are insignificant. For example, Coca-Cola has 3 cents worth of alumina in it, so if that goes up 10%, that's 3/10 of the century gonna back down. But Trump said he will not back down on tariff. This tariff proponent accused China, whose industry are propped up by the state and have significantly lower labor cost, of dumping cheap steel and alumina on the US market, causing prices to fall, enforcing American companies out of business. One company that raised this issue with Century Alumina, which strenuously lobbied the Trump administration. The excess production that was going on the world, a lot of driven from online steep over market, then you had millions and millions tons that was sitting in the warehouse all around the world because it had no place else to go, and market participants look at that and that's a recipe for disaster, and alumina price crashed by 40% on that basis. At one point it announced they were closing, the entire industry was gonna go 100%. As respected, China responded like tit for tat. They initially slapping tariff on 50 billion worth American product. On the top of the list were soybeans. Beijing imported almost $13 billion worth of soybean from American farmers. Every year, US produce 50 to 60 tons of soybeans on an average, but on this tariff going through, their production could be zero. Also, the Trump administration announced another $200 billion worth of Chinese product on tariff. Predictably, China voted to retaliate But it was not only China. Trump targeted to the surprise of even his own supporters. In Congress, the White House announced potential tariff on America's closest allies. In response, even America's docile northern neighbor threatened to tear hundreds of American goods. So in conclusion, tariff policy significantly increased price both domestic and foreign goods and lead the significant job loss. So according to Trump, they had 375 billion budget deficit with China. That was not good because US import a lot more from China than they export, so that is unfair trade for him. Now the next part will explained by Fojila Akter.
To be continued with Shapla, Trump's decision made all the economists scared, because his decision might affect the whole economy of the United States. So that there were 11,000 economists with the formal economic advisor law firm have suggested to decrying Trump's trade policy. They were scared because this war will be affected the domestic consumers, increase price, it will be encourage retaliations, slow down global trade, and also it will be a negative for economic growth and employment. Moreover, this trade war potentially affected American industries and business. According to Donald Trump, trade deficit is unfair, is not good, but economics experts said that trade deficit is not always bad. So, we should not look at only the size of trade deficit. Rather, we have to look at the balanced trade, because trade is mutually beneficial. But Trump did not agree on that. Rather, he had announced that they have great manufacture, so Apple should be made in US, not in China. Well, everyone knows that US has great manufacture. But do you think that is possible? Maybe or may not be. Let's hear from the expert.
Yeah, the raw material flows into one side of the building and an iPhone comes out the other side, and it just doesn't work that way.
We visited Kyle Wiens, whose company iFixit teaches customers how to hack their electronics, to see what it would take to bring iPhone production to the US.
All right, so this iPhone screen, the LCD was made by Sharp in Japan. The infamous battery, I'm reasonably confident that this was made in China. If there was one thing that we wanted to bring home, I think would be a relatively easy thing to start making batteries in the US.
So a bit of advice for Donald Trump.
He likes Tesla.
He loves coal, too.
He loves coal. The headphone speaker, same story. This is the back panel of the phone. This is made in China. I put
There's going to be a little pile
China.
of stuff in China, thus proving Donald Trump's point that they're eating our lunch.
The rear-facing camera made by Sony in Japan. A dialogue semiconductor part designed in Germany. This is a baseband amplifier, and this is made by TDK in Taiwan. Getting crowded in Taiwan. The antennas that power the iPhone are a company out of Massachusetts called Skyworks, but they do manufacture parts in Mexico. The A10 processor. It's based on IP that Apple licensed from the UK-based company. Apple's design team is actually in Israel. It is manufactured in Taiwan, but there is RAM inside it that was made in Korea.
It's really, really hard to make an iPhone.
Absolutely.
But even if all iPhone component manufacturing was brought to the United States, the over 50 elements needed to make those components are sourced from around the globe.
Thinking that tariffs are the magical tool that is bringing the entire supply chain, the entire ecosystem to the United States is a task that's larger than even Apple could accomplish.
Well, we heard from the expert whether making iPhone is possible or not. Though it's possible, but it's really, really hard. There are many impact is going on, so next part will cover by the Alpona Akter.
Now I'm going to talk about how the US-China trade relationship is at risk because of COVID-19. I will talk about the economic and political conflict between these two countries, effect of this conflict and future assumptions. So the US-China trade relationship is at risk of spinning out of control into another round of tit-for-tat escalations. Nothing has been done to bridge fundamental differences between the two countries, and risk has been added, not removed, due to COVID-19. This leaves the two economies on course for further decoupling, which will generate cost in both economies as well as globally. Economic and political conflicts with China change the dynamic of xenophobia in the USA. Conflicts over trade rules and policies grew during the second and third year of the Trump's presidency. The relationship worsened greatly when the COVID-19 pandemic reached the US homeland. By mid-year 2020, US-China relations had become the worst since 1972. In addition to trade sanctions, risky military encounters, the cessations of nearly all flights into the USA from China, and the closure of the Houston consulate exacerbated relations. The US labeled Huawei Technologies Company and its telecom companion ZTE as a national security threat. The effect of US-China trade conflict, which has led to higher consumer prices, lower corporate profits, unstable market, and slower economic growth. One analysis shows how President Trump's tweet related to the trade conflict have adversely affected the stock market. Account deficit and manufacturing decline in the USA are the result of low savings, high labor cost, and rising service sectors rather than import from China. Moreover, deficit reductions have not promoted economic growth, and the trade deficit reduction with China will likely lead to deficit with other countries. It appears that the USA will not reduce its trade deficit with China, and even if it could do so, the USA will not achieve strong economic progress but instead develop deficit with other countries. The future assumptions. The impact of the virus on the global economy will be more severe than that of other recent, more localized epidemics, and both the US and China will be grappling with substantial domestic economic slowdowns. These slowdowns may last far longer than most expect. The experience of China, the first country to suppress the virus in its initial wave, illustrates the difficulty of engineering a rapid economic recovery. While most indicators point to an upswing in Chinese manufacturing, exports are expected to remain soft due to a decline in demand from the US and the European Union. Pandemics do not destroy capital stock but rather suppress consumptions for a long time. Many consumers will engage in precautionary savings due to increased economic uncertainty. Moreover, consumption patterns are likely to shift in the long term. More people will dine at home rather than in restaurants, and more companies will employ video conferencing to avoid business travel.
The commercial relation between US and China continue to struggling with fundamental challenges. In January 2020, two countries started to repairing its trade relation, and they reached in Phase 1 trade agreement on January 15, 2020. Phase 1 trade deal that requires structural reforms and other changes to China's economy and trade regime in the areas of intellectual property, technologies transfer, agriculture, financial service, and currency foreign exchange. It also includes a commitment by China that it will make substantial additional purchases of US goods and services in the coming years. Importantly, the agreement establishes a strong dispute resolution system that ensures prompt and effective implementation and enforcement. The United States has agreed to modify its Section 301 tariff action in a significant way and agreed that in spite of the current global health emergency, both countries fully expect to meet their obligations under the agreement in a timely manner. China agreed to improve the atmosphere for implementation of the Phase 1 deal, which calls for Beijing to boost its purchases from the US by $200 billion. Also, China cut the tariff on US goods about half of the total percentage. On the other hand, US cut some of the tariff initially, but not that much. COVID-19 made bilateral trade negotiation more complicated. China also faced the lower economic growth in this pandemic situation, but they have rescued their country from COVID-19 because they have very lower infection rate. That is why they started to get up. But for US, they don't have any improvements in COVID infections, so they cannot start their normal work. Also, there is a political power changes in US that makes the calculation more difficult to predict the aftermath of the pandemic. As China restarted their work speed like before, but US could not, so China could counterattack for both prevent economic decline and showcase power to domestic and foreign audiences. It is too early to say anything about the post-pandemic situation since pandemic is going on, but we can say US-China trade relation is at risk. Nothing has been done to change the fundamental differences between two countries. Risk has been added, not removed due to COVID-19. If any further escalation happens, then the post-pandemic economic recovery will slow down throughout the world because China is the impressive producer and consumer of goods, so there is no option to ignore such a production giant. It is very clear that there will be a significant amount of trade disruption and trade disputes after the pandemic in the whole world because most of the countries will follow protectionism to save their country's economy. That is why trade cooperation and renovation of trade rules and policies is needed. It will be therapeutic for both the countries and for whole world where World Trade Organization has to play active role to make it happen because World Trade Organization is the only global body that can do anything about trade disputes in turmoil. Thank you.